Communism, it has a pretty obvious history of failure. The Soviet Union collapsed. I don't think anyone outside of China, for the most part, thinks the Chinese Communist Party system is good. So despite this history of failure, why does this communist socialist ideology still persevere?
I'd say the ideology endures for a few reasons. One of which is that the people who really know what they're doing, and I would put the people who know what they're really doing in like the 1% or less of actual communists.
It's always this 1%.
Yeah. These are the people who I think know how these things actually work, who really know the internal game, and they can mislead people. They can lie to people, and they can lead them along with this glorious vision of the future. They can come off as compassionate and come off as well-meaning. They can make it appear that these ideologies are actually something to be desirable, even though they themselves are looking for something that is malignant, right? I'd say the other one is just lack of education. A lot of people just frankly don't even know what socialism is or what communism is, and they don't understand economics, they don't understand history, they don't really understand any of the stuff. They've never read about the actual policies of what the Nazis did and how that relates to socialism. They don't even know this history. Mm-hmm. They're led along by surface narratives and know none of this history. They know none of the way these systems function, and they're led along purely by just surface talking points and surface narratives and race narratives or conflict narratives, agitation propaganda, as they would call it, right? Mm-hmm. Meant to drive people against each other and make people feel like they're campaigning for something righteous. I'd say a lot of them are just well-meaning people who've been misled.
It really twists the innate goodness in people, something that is coming from a moral position.
It does, and I think it's very hard for people to see through it, and especially when they're told that the other side is something you shouldn't even listen to. And then I'd say the other side of it is just it's the actual institutionalizing of socialist policies. Because as it rolls forward, right, it becomes more difficult to engage in the type of society that we used to have. Because government policy, red tape, regulations, and so on become more difficult to navigate. It becomes harder to buy a house. It becomes harder to get out of debt. It becomes harder to get around the systems they've created that are meant to keep you enslaved, essentially.
I hear that.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Yeah. It becomes more difficult to navigate. And so you're more incentivized to basically just give up and say, let the government give me some money because, that's the easier road. And the lack of incentive to actually deal with all that hardship and all that trouble to try to create your own wealth and create your own business or create your own life. The incentive is destroyed. And so I'd say it's these three things combined.
Well, so then this ties to the sort of the main topic we were discussing at the beginning, is how that there's this global battle between freedom and socialism. So how is that being played out?
Well, I'd say as things currently stand, you'll be hard set to find a country that hasn't been influenced in some ways by socialist ideas. And this isn't just government, right? If you get into like the older views on socialism, you had like the Frankfurt School promoting cultural Marxism, which it was a thing. You can read their books, Marcuse and all those guys. You can get into the ideas of, for example, the Fabian societies and the infiltration of the institutions. You can go into the syndicalists and their use of the unions system, the unions. You can get into the Owenites and their use of this whole collective, farm commune type culture, which has a big influence on a lot of the grassroots hippie type guys in this country. You can get into the Democratic Socialists of America and their use of the grassroots. You can get into international communist systems that have carried out different forms of subversion, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department currently, or their programs, for example, for political warfare to infiltrate our political systems and influence them, whether it's the Soviet-era programs for ideological subversion meant to infiltrate and whittle away at our institutions from within. And not just the U.S., but every free country, whether it was the global communist revolution promoted by the Soviet Union or the China model being promoted by the Chinese Communist Party right now. The infiltration of these ideas is taking place through just about every part of our society. Every institution has a part of it. Every cultural element has a part of it, whether it's the red Hollywood type guys, the Hollywood blacklist guys, or the CCP's influence over Hollywood right now. whether it's even going back further to just the promotion of these types of values that has been happening for a long time. These things have been infiltrating society for a very long time. And I think right now where we're at is this battle has reached its peak, basically, where people are feeling the pressure from every direction from it, and they don't know why they're feeling this pressure. And they're realizing that the future that they thought they could have, where they could, go to school and buy a house and have a normal job and raise a family, is becoming, so it seems like something that you cannot achieve, and they don't know what the remedy to that is.
So I want to touch on freedom versus socialism. Now, I've heard this argument that actually, in the society we live in, people aren't free because, when you don't have access to healthcare, when you're sick all the time, or when you have to work a low wage job, like, you're not really free. And so therefore, the best way to sort of bring freedom to everyone is to have policies in place that have universal healthcare, that have minimum wages. So doesn't that mean that these policies actually bring people more freedom?
I'd say typically the policies bring people less freedom. And I mean, it sounds great. Yeah, I'm all for people having access to healthcare and so on. The problem is that government intervention policies are what causes a lot of these problems in the first place. Why is medicine so costly in the United States? Government intervention. My dad just went to Mexico actually for a vacation. He went to one of the pharmacies there, and he needs like heart medicine, for this high blood pressure. It's like over the counter, like dirt cheap there. You can buy it super cheap. It's the same medicine. You buy the same thing here. It's the costs are through the roof. It's because of government intervention. Why is it that school is like a debt trap these days? It's because government intervention. It's federal loans. In other words, the schools don't have an incentive to making it affordable because they don't need to make it affordable. They don't need to make incentive for people to pay off their debts because they don't need them to pay off their debts. They don't need people to have jobs that can lead to success within the normal society because they don't care whether they can pay off their debts or not. It's federal loans. The government intervention is what allows it. Going back to even the financial systems, right? The banks, this was one of the big arguments against the Federal Reserve, is that normally if banks give out bad loans, the banks fail. They default. They go under. Bad practices lead to failure. The Federal Reserve made it so that failure does not happen. And so what you have is institutionalized failure, where banks can give out bad loans nonstop. And if they fail, if they go under, technically they're bailed out by the system. The system saves them. That is done through inflation, which comes back on you and I, which comes out of our savings, right? The inflation, what doubles once every 10 years, meaning you can have 20,000 in the bank. In 10 years, that 20,000 is still going to be 20,000, but the actual practical value has been cut in half. It's government interventionist policies that are creating a lot of the problems we feel, and we're told that the solution to it is more government interventionist policies.
So what's the right amount of government interventionist policies?
This has been the discussion in the world through most of history, I'd say, And I think this, keep in mind, socialism, you could argue, has always existed in some ways. You could argue that any tyrannical government had socialist elements to it, right? Even during the time of the French Revolution, where they had the reign of terror and Robespierre and these guys, the whole idea they were promoting was very similar to what we have now. In fact, modern communism came out of that, right? Francois Noël Gracchus Babeuf and his conspiracy of equals, leading up to League of Outlaws, League of the Just, up to the Communist League, and so on, right? Even at that time, they were saying, hey, this is just like the reign of Tiberius in ancient Rome. They were pointing to older tyrants.
The reign of terror was doing that, like Robespierre was doing that in the French Revolution.
Yeah. The types of restrictions on individual freedom, the government's ability to interfere in the basic ways of life, right, has always existed, typically during the fall of civilization. Typically, when civilization is on the decline, you always have policies like this. The problem you have with communism, and this is for people who are more deep into the readings of Marx himself, a lot of people think he did it intentionally, that he created a system that manufactures the downfalls of society, that creates the systems of what you have when a society is falling, is collapsing. And if you understand the whole idea he was going on of the 5 stages of civilization and the very idea that communism needs to emerge from the collapse of existing institutions. Yeah, you could say that that was part of the idea, that socialism was by design meant to fail. It was by design meant to create the conditions of a failing society, the kind of society you have whenever a government or a system is going to collapse.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Yeah, as the government gets more and more power, that obviously means individuals have less and less freedom to control their own lives. And that is typically what has happened at the end of a civilization. Any of China's dynasties, if you look at the Roman Empire.
Almost always, yeah. Almost always.